The mail-order bride arrived with fear in her eyes. The cowboy said, "Darlin, I don't bite unless you ask." Texas Panhandle, summer of 1884. The sun scorched the earth, turning the dry roads of Dry Ridge into slow-moving rivers of dust. Even the wind was hot, brushing against Amanda's cheeks like sandpaper. The sky above was a brutal white, offering no shade, no promise of mercy. Amanda Bell Grant stepped off the stagecoach with trembling legs, her fingers clinging to a worn wooden suitcase as though it were the only stable thing in her life. In some ways, it was. Inside were just 3 dresses, a black and white photo of her mother, and a small leather-bound journal she carried like a Bible. She wore a plain cream dress, now wrinkled and sweat-stained from days on the trail. Her boots thudded softly against the ground as she looked around. A man spit tobacco by the livery stable. A child stared at her from behind a barrel. No one smiled. She had never been this far west, never felt this alone. From the edge of the street, he came. Tall, broad-shouldered, hat low over his eyes, dust clinging to his boots. His coat was the color of dry earth, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His face was angular, sun-worn, with a short beard the color of ash. A faint scar curved near his left temple, old but sharp enough to steal her breath. Her heart began to hammer. That must be him. Wade Langston. But he looked nothing like the man from the small photograph folded in the last letter. And far worse, he looked exactly like the stories. "He killed a man once," one woman had whispered behind her gloved hand at a depot in Kansas City. "Not in battle, just stared at him, then shot him between the eyes. His fiancée left him at midnight," said another, "walked barefoot through a field just to get away." Amanda clutched her suitcase tighter, her breath caught. She instinctively stepped back. The man stopped a few feet away from her, standing tall but not towering, observing her like a rancher studies a wild colt. Not with hunger, not with cruelty, just with a kind of quiet patience that somehow unnerved her even more. Then, his lips tilted into something that could have been a smile. His voice was low, rich, like smoke curling from a chimney. "Darlin, I don't bite unless you ask." The words hit her like a slap. She blinked, her shoulders stiffened. Heat rushed to her cheeks, embarrassment maybe, or a flicker of fear. Her knuckles whitened around the suitcase handle. But when she didn't respond, he took a half-step back, raised both hands slightly, not in surrender, just in soft assurance. "Sorry," he said gently. "That was a poor joke. I'm Wade Langston. You must be Miss Amanda Grant?" She gave a small nod, still avoiding his eyes. She couldn't look at him too long. Something about that face carved by wind and war made her feel both exposed and invisible all at once. He reached out a hand, then thought better of it. Instead, he bent and picked up her suitcase. He didn't swing it like a man would with a heavy load. He held it carefully, like it might contain glass. "It's about half a mile to the ranch," he said. "It ain't fancy, but it's home, and it's safe." She hesitated, then followed, always 3 steps behind. They walked, in silence. Amanda didn't know what she expected. She had imagined an awkward handshake, some sort of nervous conversation, maybe even a cold, transactional tone. But not this. Not a man who noticed her fear and didn't feed it. She glanced sideways at him. He wasn't looking at her. His jaw clenched, his brow slightly furrowed. He was giving her space, letting her breathe. And somehow, that unsettled her, more than if he'd been forward. He didn't leer. He didn't ask about the wedding. He didn't reach for my hand, she thought. He just walks. And then, quietly, inside her head, another thought whispered, "He's not like the others." Wade walked a little ahead, watching the horizon, but inside, his thoughts were circling like vultures. "She's frightened. I can see it. Like a deer about to bolt. Don't push. Don't ask. Don't ruin it like before." His grip on the suitcase tightened, not because it was heavy, but because it was hers. When the ranch finally came into view, a modest house, weathered barn, and crooked cottonwood tree, Amanda paused. Wade turned to her and said calmly, "This house is yours, if you want it. There's a room made up, with a lock inside. You don't owe me anything, not tonight, not ever, if you change your mind." Amanda didn't reply. She stepped over the threshold, not because she trusted him, but because, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like prey, and for now, that was enough. The house was smaller than Amanda expected, but not in a disappointing way, just honest, weathered boards, a porch with a creaking step. The cottonwood tree out back leaned slightly east, as if the wind had tried to break it, failed, and gave up. Inside, the air smelled of pine soap, iron, and dry earth. There were no curtains, no decorations, just a clean floor, a stove, and furniture built more for endurance than style. Everything had its place. Nothing was wasted. Wade motioned down the hall to a small room at the far end. "This one's yours, locks on the inside. If you need anything, just call out." His tone was calm, unassuming. His eyes never dropped below her chin. Amanda didn't know whether to feel comforted or more afraid. She gave a small nod and stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. That night, she sat curled on the bed, still in her travel dress. She hadn't dared to change. The unfamiliar silence pressed against her ears. She hadn't lit the oil lamp, only the hallway's dim glow leaked through the crack beneath the door. She didn't sleep. Instead, she stared at the door handle, every creak of the old wood sending a spike of tension through her ribs. Her journal sat beside her, unopened. In her lap she held a small bottle of ink like a weapon. Her mother's words echoed in her head. "If a man means you harm, do not wait to scream. Do not wait to see." Then, just past midnight, the doorknob turned. She bolted upright. Her breath froze in her throat. Without thinking, she grabbed the bottle of ink, stood with her back to the wall, and raised her arm, ready to strike. Her eyes were wide, wild. Her heart slammed like hooves on packed dirt. The door creaked open an inch, then two. Wade appeared in the gap, backlit by the soft flicker of the kitchen lantern. He held something in his arms. He didn't look at her. "I forgot," he said quietly. "Nights get cold out here. That blanket's too thin." He stepped forward just enough to set a folded wool blanket on the floor. Beside it, he placed a ceramic cup and a small tin pitcher of water. That was all. No questions, no stares, no lingering. He closed the door. Amanda stood frozen, still holding the bottle mid-air. The silence returned like a tide, but it no longer pressed against her. Her arm slowly dropped. The ink slipped from her fingers and rolled to a stop against the wall. Her throat tightened, not with fear but with something far heavier. She stepped forward, picked up the blanket, and pressed it to her chest. The wool was rough, but warm, real. Tears stung her eyes, not from sadness, not even from relief, from surprise. She wrote only one line in her journal that night. "He didn't touch me, just didn't want me to be cold." In the morning, the pitcher was gone, replaced by a fresh one still steaming. Next to it lay a small square of cloth. Wrapped inside, a cornbread muffin, still warm. She opened her door to the smell of grass being cut. Wade was outside, swinging a scythe with steady rhythm. When he noticed her watching, he didn't wave. He just said, without turning, "Coffee's hot if you drink it." She did. Later that afternoon, Amanda stepped into the back garden. She hadn't expected anything more than weeds, but there, tucked behind the shed, were a handful of young shoots breaking through the dust. White chrysanthemum. She recognized them instantly. Her mother's favorite. Wade was hammering fence posts nearby. He caught her looking and said simply, "My ma used to say, if you plant what once made you happy, maybe it'll find its way back." Amanda didn't answer, but her hand unconsciously reached up and touched the pendant at her neck. That evening, just before dusk, she wandered behind the house, toward the old cottonwood tree. The wind tugged at its limbs. Some were broken, bent toward the earth, but its trunk held firm. New leaves had begun to push through the scarred bark. Wade joined her quietly. "Wind'll snap your branches sometimes," he said, But if the root's good, you'll grow back." Amanda looked at the tree, then at him. She didn't speak, but for the first time her lips curved, not wide, not certain, just enough, and this time it was real. It was the fourth morning since Amanda arrived at the ranch when Wade rode back with a fresh cut across his right shoulder. The sun hadn't yet passed the ridge, but sweat clung to his brow, and his shirt was torn, dark with blood. He said nothing as he dismounted, only winced slightly when his boot hit the ground. Amanda had just stepped out onto the porch with a tin cup of coffee in hand. She saw the red, the ragged cloth, the way he held one arm tighter than the other, and froze. "I'm fine," he muttered, waving it off. But she didn't step aside. Instead, she said softly, "Sit." He hesitated, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. But then he sat on the bench just outside the door. Amanda walked past him, returning with a basin of water, a rag, and the bottle of antiseptic she had found in the kitchen cupboard 2 nights ago. She knelt beside him. "Take off your shirt," she said quietly, eyes not meeting his. He hesitated, not out of modesty, but something heavier. His fingers lingered on the buttons, then slowly worked them open. The fabric peeled away from his shoulder, sticky with dried blood. Amanda dabbed at the wound, gently but firmly. As the blood lifted, the scar beneath became visible. It wasn't new. A thick, jagged line carved diagonally across his back, pink and cruel against his sun-darkened skin. Amanda stared for a moment, longer than she meant to. Wade felt her pause. He did not flinch, but his voice dropped, rough and low. "That one ain't from today." Amanda didn't speak. He exhaled, slow. "I was in Tennessee. They caught me outside Franklin. I was a Union scout. One of them Confederate patrol, maybe just boys with guns, dragged me behind a barn where they'd trapped some runaways inside a church." His voice flattened. Each word came like the tightening of a knot. "They told me to set fire to it. Said if I didn't, they'd do worse. Said I'd earn my freedom if I followed orders." Amanda's hands froze. "I told them no." The breeze shifted the cottonwood leaves above. Wade kept staring forward, into the pasture beyond the fence. "So they whipped me. Left me there. Didn't kill me, though. Guess that was the lesson." Amanda pressed the rag to the edge of the wound. The silence between them deepened. Inside her chest, doubt stirred. The voice of her mother again. "Men with pasts, carry them into your future. Be careful." But the man before her wasn't just a past. He was present, still, bleeding, breathing, not defending what he had done, but owning what he hadn't. He could have lied. He didn't. She dipped the rag again, squeezing water over the fresh cut. The redness receded slightly. Then, without a word, she reached for a clean cloth, wrapped it around his shoulder, and began tying it in place. Her fingers were sure, not soft, but careful. Wade looked down at her, at the line of her jaw, the loose tendrils of hair escaping her braid, the focus in her brow. She never once looked up. When it was done, he stood and slid his shirt back on, slowly, carefully. Amanda reached for the torn seam at the cuff, held it between her fingers. "I can mend this," she said softly, "if you leave it by the fire tonight." He nodded once, then stepped back outside. That night, after supper, Wade left his shirt on the back of the rocking chair near the hearth. Amanda waited until he'd gone out to check the horses before she picked it up and sat by the fire. The needle was already threaded. She said nothing, but her hands moved steadily, mending not just fabric, but something unspoken between them, something still fragile, but finally, real. The late summer sun had begun to soften when Amanda rode into town with a list in her pocket and dust on her boots. She had insisted on going alone. Wade hadn't argued. He had only handed her a small pouch of coins and reminded her where to find the grocer's ledgers. It was her first trip back to Dry Ridge since arriving. She kept her eyes low, her words brief. The townsfolk were mostly indifferent. One nod, two muttered greetings, but she felt the weight of their stares, even when their backs were turned. Inside the general store, she breathed easier. The cool shadow of the awning, the smell of ground coffee and old flour, it reminded her of places she once knew, before fire turned them to ash. She stood at the counter, speaking softly with the shopkeeper's wife, when a voice behind her froze her blood. "Well now, if it ain't little Amanda Bell." She turned. The man was tall, wiry, with skin browned by sun and years of bad habits. His teeth were yellowed, his shirt stained at the collar. But it was his eyes, sharp, amused, cruel, that took her back instantly. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He leaned in slightly, his voice low but slicing. "You can run west, girl," he murmured, "but the ashes stay on your dress, still smell it on you, smoke and sin." Amanda dropped the tin cup in her hand. It clattered across the floor, spilling tea. Her hands shook violently. Her breath came in sharp gasps. The shopkeeper's wife asked something, but Amanda couldn't hear it. The room tilted, her chest constricted. She turned and ran. Through the doorway, down the steps, past the livery and the well, until her boots hit the path home. She didn't stop until she reached the ranch gate. Her knuckles scraped raw, unlocking the front door. She slammed it behind her and slid down the wall, her shoulders heaving. Tears came, not graceful, quiet ones. Ugly sobs, torn from a place deep inside that she had buried when the fire took her family, and that man had stood watching. She didn't light the lamp, she didn't remove her boots. She curled in the corner, knees to chest, and shook. Wade returned an hour later, having seen the horse tied up haphazardly outside. He didn't call her name, didn't knock. He just stood for a moment, listening. Then he went into the kitchen. He ladled stew into a bowl, tore a piece of bread from the end of the loaf, and set it carefully on a tray, a clean cloth beside it. He carried it down the hall and placed it outside her door. Then he turned and walked back outside, boots silent on the porch. Amanda didn't open the door, not for food, not for words. But when the sun dipped behind the hills and the wind grew colder, she rose on weak legs and crept toward the front window. Outside, Wade sat in the rocking chair with his rifle across his knees. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't tense. He was simply there. She watched him for a long time. Midnight passed. He didn't move. By dawn, she opened the door. The stew was still warm in its covered bowl. The bread hadn't dried. The cloth was folded with quiet precision. She picked up the tray and held it against her chest. Not because she was hungry, but because someone had stayed, and that meant more than any word ever could. Amanda had begun walking into town once a week, just enough to show her face, to keep her hands busy, to remember that she wasn't hiding anymore. Wade never asked why she went, never offered to come along. He simply handed her the satchel and said, "Be safe," like it was a prayer. On one of those late afternoons, Amanda stayed longer than usual. The sun had dipped lower by the time she left the bakery. She turned a corner near the edge of town and stopped at the sight ahead. There, by the old Miller homestead, stood Wade. He was shirt-sleeved and sweat-soaked, sleeves rolled high and shoulders taut with effort. A hammer hung from one hand, a loose plank in the other. He was repairing a section of fencing that had clearly been long neglected, dry wood, splintered posts, wire sagging. A few townspeople stood nearby, watching with puzzled looks. "Is that Langston?" someone asked quietly behind her. Amanda remained still. Wade didn't notice the crowd. He worked with method. He measured, hammered, stepped back, adjusted. His motions were practiced, patient. The sun dropped lower, and still he stayed, lantern lit beside him as dusk crept in. It was Mrs. Edith Miller's property. Amanda realized that now. The widow had no sons, no farmhands, no kin left in the county, just a rocking chair on a porch and a heart too stubborn to leave. No one had asked Wade to help her, and yet there he was. By the time Amanda returned home, her thoughts had gone quiet in a new, unfamiliar way. That night, she left the supper table first. In the privacy of her room, she pulled her journal from beneath the pillow, not the small one for daily thoughts, but the second one, the one she had not yet used. She opened to the first page and began writing. "Dear Amanda, Today you watched a man do good without needing anyone to see it. You saw him offer strength without expecting thanks, and something in your chest softened. She paused. She smiled faintly. Then she wrote the next line. Maybe you are no longer afraid of being loved. Each day after that she wrote again, not to him, not to her past, but to herself, as if she were recording the slow unraveling of a heart that had been too tightly wound for too long. A week later, in the market square, someone asked Wade why he had spent so much effort fixing that fence. He shrugged and said, "She ain't got anyone else, and I've got more time than I know what to do with." No pride, no explanation, just quiet honesty. Amanda overheard it. She didn't speak, but she looked at him that evening across the dinner table, and for the first time she didn't look away. The air had cooled with the turning season. Nights came earlier, darker. Amanda had taken to reading on the porch steps after supper, a wool shawl around her shoulders and her journal in her lap. Sometimes she wrote, sometimes she just held the book and listened to the crickets. That evening, after a quiet meal, she left the table with her journal tucked under one arm, but in her tiredness, or perhaps in a moment of distraction, she left it on the arm of the chair by the hearth. Wade came in from the stable later, fingers sore from lifting grain. He saw the book, flipped half open, a page creased by the weight of the leather cover. He should have walked away. But the handwriting caught his eye. Familiar loops. He had seen her write like that in the mornings, always bent over the page as though afraid someone might steal her thoughts. He picked it up gently, meaning only to set it aside. Then he saw the words. "I came here to forget, not to fall in love. I married him because I needed to leave that place behind, not because I needed him." His hands froze on the leather cover. For a long moment he did not move. Then he closed the book softly, set it back exactly where he found it, and stepped outside without a sound. Amanda returned minutes later. She saw the book untouched, or so she thought. But when she looked out the window, Wade was sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, not facing her, not facing the stars, just facing nothing. And for the first time since she'd arrived, he didn't say good night. He didn't even glance her way when she whispered, "Wade?" No answer. Only the creak of wood beneath his weight, the rhythmic breath of someone trying to keep something inside. Amanda stood at the doorway for a long time, heart aching. The line she had written came back to her like a sharp wind. Not because I needed him. She hadn't meant it to hurt. It was her truth at the time, a survival truth, but it read like a wound, and she knew now that Wade had seen it. She spent that night staring at the ceiling, the blanket tucked around her as if it could guard her from the space growing between them. In the silence, she realized something. Wade had never asked for her affection, never demanded her past. All he had done was offer his steadiness day after day in small, quiet ways that expected nothing in return. And she, without intending to, had told him he was nothing more than an escape. By morning, Wade was already in the fields. Amanda took the journal and pressed it flat on the kitchen table. She stared at the words she had written and, for the first time, picked up a pencil, not to erase them, but to write beneath them. But now, I see him, and it hurts to think he might stop waiting for me to catch up. She closed the book, set it down again where he might see it, and began her morning as usual. Except this time, she brewed his coffee the way he liked it, and when he came in from the fields, she met his eyes, not with apology, but with something braver, something that had taken her months to find, something close to love. The wind had shifted suddenly that afternoon. Amanda was in the kitchen, kneading bread with the radio silence of habit, when the first scent hit her, sharp, acrid, unnatural. She turned toward the window and saw the sky tinged with smoke, low and curling. By the time she reached the porch, the sun was gone behind a haze, and Wade was already shouting from the barn. Fires caught the dry brush behind the stables. The wind was fierce, dragging the flames faster than either of them expected. Amanda's heart lurched when she saw the blaze creeping along the fence line, licking toward the wooden structures. Wade didn't hesitate. He ran straight for the barn, shouting for the horses. Amanda heard the crash of hooves, the panicked cries of animals. She sprinted back into the house, grabbed a wet cloth and bucket, and ran toward the well, but the flames had already jumped toward the porch. She screamed his name. Wade emerged moments later, a blackened bandana tied across his face, driving the last of the livestock toward the creek bed. His shirt was torn, smoke-streaked, and one arm hung lower than the other. Amanda saw the red blistering already rising on his skin. "Wade." "Get back," he yelled hoarsely. "It's coming around the house." But she didn't move. Not toward him, not toward the barn. She turned on her heel and ran inside. "Amanda!" His voice broke across the wind. Inside, the heat had already curled the wallpaper near the windows. Embers floated in through the cracked boards. Amanda ducked beneath the thick smoke, coughed hard, and stumbled toward the sitting room. She dropped to her knees by the fireplace. There, on the lowest shelf, was the small leather-bound book Wade always kept but never let her read. She knew what it was now. He had never said it aloud, but she had seen how he carried it when he thought she wasn't looking, how he would hold it in his hands at night before bed, not opening it, just resting it on his lap like a prayer. She grabbed it, pressing it to her chest, then turned and ran. The smoke clawed at her lungs, her eyes blurred. She hit the porch railing hard, stumbled into the yard, and collapsed into Wade's arms. He pulled her close, coughing, his own body shaking. "What the hell were you doing?" he rasped. She held up the book with trembling fingers. "I couldn't let it burn." Wade stared at it, then at her. His expression cracked, something raw and breaking. "That's just a book," he whispered. Amanda shook her head, voice hoarse. "No, it isn't. It's you, and all the words you never say." Wade blinked through the smoke. "You knew?" "I guessed. But tonight I needed to be sure." She touched his burned arm gently, eyes full of pain, not just for the fire, but for everything they hadn't said. "I came here to escape," she said, tears streaking through soot. "But I stayed, because you're the only place I've ever felt safe." Wade lowered his head, his breath shaking against her temple. His hands held her tighter than ever before, not with restraint, but with surrender. In the background, the fire still hissed and crackled, but they stood inside its glow untouched, wrapped in something stronger. Not the heat, not the danger, but in a forgiveness neither had known they needed until it nearly slipped away. That night, they didn't sleep apart. They sat on the porch, wrapped in one blanket, backs against the scorched wall, the leather journal between them. And when Amanda reached for his hand, he didn't flinch. He only held on. Spring came late to Dry Ridge, but when it arrived, it did so with a softness that made the winter feel like a half-remembered ache. The land had healed from the fire. New grass reached toward the sun. Flowers opened with fragile courage. And the willow behind the house, once scorched and bent, now stood tall again, its fresh green leaves fluttering in the breeze like silk ribbons in a child's hand. Amanda stood in the garden, her hands buried in soil as she tended the row of white chrysanthemums. She wore no gloves. She liked the feeling of earth under her nails. It reminded her that she was still growing, too. The back door creaked. She looked up. Wade stood just outside the porch, holding something in both hands. He was clean-shaven for once, his shirt tucked in, his boots polished. He looked nervous, and that was rare enough to make her heart stutter. "Come here a second," he said quietly. She rose, brushing dirt from her apron. As she approached, Wade stepped away from the porch and toward the willow tree. Amanda followed, curious. When they reached the patch of soft shade beneath the branches, he stopped and turned to face her. "I've been thinking," he began, voice steady but low. "The first time you came here, it was because of a contract. Letters, a name, a place to run." Amanda's throat tightened, but she didn't interrupt. "You didn't know me. Hell, I didn't even know myself back then. We were both just surviving." He took a breath, then slowly knelt down on one knee. Amanda gasped. Wade reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, carved from dark polished wood with a faint grain like the swirl of river current. Its surface was smooth, and she could tell immediately it had been made with care, maybe pain, definitely love. "I carved it from the old willow," he said. "The part that didn't burn. Figured, if it could grow again, maybe we could too." Amanda's lips trembled. Wade looked up at her, his eyes steady. "The first time you came here, you were shaking." "I was terrified," she whispered, tears beginning to blur her vision. He smiled, faint but warm. "Well, would you like to shake again, but this time from happiness?" Amanda let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. She covered her mouth with both hands. Then she nodded. "Yes," she choked. "Yes, Wade." He stood, slipping the ring onto her finger with a hand that was still rough from years of work, but trembling now with gentleness. They didn't kiss right away. Instead, they just held each other, beneath the tree that had almost died, beneath the sky that finally seemed kind again. Later, as the wind